Welcome to the Purely Prabhupada YouTube channel. This video series is called Reality Distinguished from Illusion for the Welfare of All. My name is Kamra Devi Dasi, and I am a disciple of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And this is the 10th video of the series. It's called Controlled by Uncontrolled Senses. And this presentation is foundationally philosophical, and we have to understand and apply some basic rudiments of philosophy in order to build real spiritual strength. Without a strong spiritual understanding, it's hard to stay on the path of devotion, because the tendency will be to become sentimental and then easily deterred if the going gets hard. But this concept of sense control is also essential for understanding how not to be used by a societal system that relies on us being weak in our ability to control our senses. And also how one who is weak in sense control should not be entrusted with a position that affects others, as he or she will be easily enticed. Bhagavad Gita translates as Song of God. It was spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, to his warrior friend Arjuna, as they sat upon a chariot between the two great armies that were ready to fight the battle of Kurukshetra. Bhagavad Gita is the most important chapter of the epic Mahabharata, or the greater history of India. So Srila Prabhupada gave us the unadulterated translation of Bhagavad Gita with purports based on the teachings of previous spiritual teachers and his own realizations and his observations of this world. Thus, his edition is called Bhagavad Gita as it is. In his introduction to Bhagavad Gita as it is, we read on page 11, "When we are materially contaminated, we are called conditioned. False consciousness is exhibited under the impression that I am a product of material nature. This is called false ego. One who is absorbed in the thought of bodily conceptions cannot understand his situation. Bhagavad Gita was spoken to liberate one from the bodily conception of life, and Arjuna put himself in this position in order to receive this information from the Lord. One must become free from the bodily conception of life. That is the preliminary activity for the transcendentalist. One who wants to become free, who wants to become liberated, must first of all learn that he is not this material body. Mukti, or liberation, means freedom from material consciousness. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also, the definition of liberation is given. Mukti means liberation from the contaminated consciousness of this material world and situation in pure consciousness. All the instructions of Bhagavad Gita are intended to awaken this pure consciousness, and therefore we find at the last stage of the Gita's instructions that Krishna is asking Arjuna whether he is now in purified consciousness. Purified consciousness means acting in accordance with the instructions of the Lord. This is the whole sum and substance of purified consciousness. Consciousness is already there because we are part and parcel of the Lord. But for us, there is the affinity of being affected by the inferior modes. But the Lord, being the supreme, is never affected. That is the difference between the Supreme Lord and the conditioned souls. Of course, the introduction to Bhagavad Gita is very lengthy, and I extracted that section for the points that I wanted to make in this video. So when one becomes aware that he is not the material body, he can then differentiate between activities that support the body in good health and well-being for spiritual development, and those activities that only support the gratification of the senses of that organism, which we are not. We have to take proper care of the body. We're not the body, but it has to be maintained nicely for the service of God. It was given by God, and it has to be cared for in that mood. That would include healthy diet, proper rest, cleanliness, sufficient bodily exercise, and so on. Activities that put excessive focus on the body or result from excessive focus on the body must be given up in favor of the efforts that promote our coming back to our innate God consciousness, our Krishna consciousness. These activities of sense gratification might include unnatural cosmetic pursuits, sexual activities meant for sense pleasure, mundane entertainment, intoxication, eating for the sake of simply gratifying the tongue, and so on. Not only does the bodily concept of life, the illusion that we're this body, lead to the loss of the control of the senses and make us the slave of those senses, but it means that we're easily controlled by others. We become controlled by the material energy, and we postpone our going back to the eternal and blissful kingdom of God. We become controlled by others as we succumb to the false belief that we are this lump of matter and become subservient to the addiction of trying to gratify the senses. By this addiction, we become easily controlled and manipulated. We give up our freedom to corrupt leaders and advertisers who take advantage of the degradation of society, the lack of sense control among the general populace, and offer so many promises of greater and greater sense gratification while they tighten the control of the population. We see that in nature, animals are conquered by their senses. Deer can be brought to a halt and then easily killed when they succumb to the sound of sweet music. Fish meet their demise by a fragrant, tasty morsel on a hook. To control the senses is a strength, and in order to achieve sense control, first we must understand that we're not this body and decide not to serve it more than is required. We must learn our position in relation to the Supreme Lord. What is our goal in life? And then the determination can be there to control the senses. But sense control does not mean negation or to try to artificially create some void. We have senses. So then what is the solution? The senses must be positively employed so that we can make spiritual progress. But no sense control means simply animal life. To control the sense of hearing, the ears can be engaged in hearing the holy names of the Lord, either quietly in private meditation or as group chanting. And by hearing and relishing the pastimes of God, Krishna, and the scriptures, either written by God himself or by his devotees in glorification of him. To control the tongue doesn't mean fasting. Fasting without spiritual purpose can create even more agitation to the sense of taste, although sometimes it might have to be used as a remedial measure for health. But control of the tongue means taste only the foodstuffs that have first been offered with devotion to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is discussed more in our video series that we presented at purifymylife.com. Controlling the tongue also means to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra and to glorify the Lord. The tongue is the most important sense to control, because by controlling the tongue, by chanting the Lord's holy names and his glories, and taking only Krishna prasadam, foods first offered to Krishna, the urges of the belly and the genitals will also be controlled. Without controlling the tongue, there can't be control of any of the other senses. So as we read from Srila Prabhupada's introduction to Bhagavad Gita at the beginning of this presentation, Bhagavad Gita was spoken to liberate one from the bodily conception of life. To be set free of the bodily conception of life is the first step, the foundational principle towards further spiritual progress. Bhagavad Gita as it is, presented by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, is the only pure rendition of this great literature available in the world today. You can find other editions of Bhagavad Gita, but aside from Bhagavad Gita as it is, all of them are tainted by impersonalism, voidism, and outright mental speculation. This edition of Bhagavad Gita that Srila Prabhupada has given us has inspired hearts all over the world with its profound truths, purely rendered. We have hard copies available at purelyprabhupada.com, and there is also a link to read this edition online. Thank you very much for listening. Hare Krishna.
If you are interested in the subject matter of this video and would like to learn more, please visit purelyprabhupada.com. Ancient truths for the upliftment of the modern world.